Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. From now on, you will find the podcast and all information around every episode on diederik.blog. So it's not thepolarizer.com anymore. It's diederik.blog. That's where everything will live. And the name of the podcast will also change into Diederik's Beach Bar instead of the Polarizer Podcast. So the name makes more sense because it explains exactly what you can expect from the conversation. That's how it started, actually. The conversations with people in bars. So, and that's the general vibe I also try to bring to the show so far. So go to diederik.blog and find everything around the podcast on there. With that out of the way, this is episode number 35. It's a follow-up to the conversation I had with Francis Aaron, who is a rapper who is taking on the woke cult, the woke church, if you will. And his raps are tackling relevant, controversial, social and cultural topics with philosophy, sociology and psychology. And I suggest you listen to episode 34 first before listening to this one, as this is a part 2 of a 2-part conversation. But before we get started, I will tell you about our wonderful sponsors. The show is brought to you by Amazon. If you go to diederik.blog and you click on the podcast button in the menu, you will find a list of the show sponsors in there, and one of them is Amazon. If you use the Amazon link on that page, you will land on Amazon like you always do, and if you do your shopping there, I get a little kickback every time you place an order. It doesn't change things on your end at all. You pay the same amount of money and the difference comes out of Amazon's end. So that's an easy way to support the show. Just do the shopping you always do on Amazon. Just get on Amazon through the link on the website. And this show is also brought to you by Adorama. Adorama is a photo and video store where professionals shop and hobbyists alike. Whether you're looking for a video camera or a photo camera or audio stuff, Adorama is the place to get it. Again, if you click on the link through the website, you will land on the page and all your shopping will happen the way it always happens, just I get a little kickback. That's the only difference. And finally, the show is also brought to you by Alert. Alert is the food allergy app for travelers. If you travel to a country where you don't speak the language, this app will help you out because it will generate an allergy card dynamically based on your personal allergies, and it can do it in 44 different languages. You probably don't want to travel anywhere right now, but by the time everything opens, you do want to travel. And I always recommend people go out of your comfort zone, go to a place where you don't speak the language. It makes it that much more of an adventure. But if you have a food allergy, this app will help you out. It helped me out when I traveled in Thailand and Indonesia and Japan. You know, I don't speak the languages there, and I'm allergic to dairy and peanuts. I had that app with me, set it up for my personal situation, and generated that flashcard that I could just show on my phone. And people got it. I'm still alive. It works. So go to alertapp.com or look for Alert. That's spelled Allert. It's like a little play on words of the words allergy and alert. So alert spelled with 2 L's. If you look for that on the iOS App Store, you will find it there. And now it's time for the show. Hope you enjoy. Thanks again for coming on, Francis. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope I get to talk to you again in the future. Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah.
No worries.
How are you doing anyway?
Doing good, man. Although the country is locked down right now.
Yeah, we've just gone back into... I haven't really been following the news that much, to be honest. I think they've just locked down again, or London has gone into a new tier 4 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
well,
are you in full lockdown then?
Well, they shut down basically everything except for the supermarkets and dry cleaners and stuff they consider base life requirements. So.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All bars and stuff are closed here as well, but shops are still open where I am. But how have you dealt with the lockdown over this year?
Just dealt with it like everyone else. Just kind of doing the best you can, try to keep positive, and
Yeah. I think just sort of weary of lockdown and talking about COVID and all the rest of it. I just try and keep myself away from all of it, to be honest. But
yeah.
Anyway,
probably wise. It's you can't really influence it, so.
Yeah. And I switched off, I think, watching like news related stuff too a few months ago. So I just frazzled my brain with reading too much about it. So
yeah, and it's all a lot of it has gotten political too. So it's kind of, there's a lot of contradicting information out there. It's kind of hard to figure out who to really believe, because people have motives other than just to get everything going again, I feel.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different all political ideologies have been wrapped around it now, and you get the conspiracy brigade come out and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you get others who are ultra anti-lockdown, which, I mean, I'm not really, I don't know. I don't really have any strong views on it either way. I've sort of just, as you were saying, just used the sort of time to work at my own stuff really, and just get on with my own kind of, my own project. I've not really, a lot of my friends have lost their jobs and gone into furlough and all the rest of it and whatnot. So
it sucks, man.
Yeah. And I think it's a bit pointless now. The lock, it doesn't even seem like a lockdown here. People are still mooching about and doing what they always do, really. It's not really that different, apart from the bars and restaurants being closed again now.
Yeah.
So,
but do people also work at home in the UK now, or where you are now specifically?
I think so. I assume it's a bit like where you are, like the supermarkets are still open and stuff, and shops and whatnot. I don't really know what's going on, to be honest. I'm currently looking for like some sort of new job. So yeah, that's what I finished my work in the summer, and then decided to sort of start up this music stuff, slowly build it up, or at least get it going. It's going to be a long build up. I think we've established that so far.
Yeah.
But over the next year, if we release like a new song every month, once at least, starting January, I think by the end of next year, it should have built up. Like, it should hopefully some sort of compound growth.
Yeah.
So that's what this month has been for me, basically just preparing like the new songs and preparing Twitter and how to promote it and whatnot. I've been quiet on Twitter for like the last month or so. But yeah, what have you got planned for next year?
Just keep doing the podcast. I quite enjoy doing that, and I've really enjoyed our conversation the last time too. And I have a list of people I'd like to talk to, and the more episodes you have and the more downloads you have, the larger the pool of potential guests gets.
Yeah. You've had some quite big guests. You've had Zuby on twice, haven't you? So his Twitter has totally blown up, hasn't it, over this year?
Yeah, he went from, I think, like 5,000 to like 500,000 or something in a year.
Something massive, like what we're talking about, compound growth kind of stuff. But it's like a full-time job, isn't it? Promoting a social media or promoting a podcast. You have to put in a lot of sort of time and effort and whatnot to grow more.
Yeah, the one thing I need to do with my podcast is to take little clips and upload those to YouTube as well, and then because that's how people find podcasts. So now, I just have a bunch of episodes that are more than an hour long, and it's kind of hard for people to start listening to that and get hooked right away. So I think if you look at all the big ones like Joe Rogan and basically all the big ones, they have like a separate channel with little clips that are like 10-20 minutes long with a good subject. So if people search for something, it shows up in there. And then if people find it interesting, they start listening to the main one. But that's also a lot of work to do, and even recording this and putting this together is also a lot of work already. So yeah. And
I think you've got structure of time to do it. I think they would be useful. Yeah, we, like me and the producer I work with, are talking about doing starting our sort of podcast. We don't know what we're going to do with it really, but yeah, those sort of little clips, 5 to 10 minute long clips on a very specific subject that was talked about, and then a catchy sort of title that sort of tries to usher its way in onto the sort of YouTube algorithm, so it gets recommended in and amongst the videos and stuff. But yeah, it's a lot of work really, isn't it? Editing really all these and whatnot. It's just time just saps away. That's what I feel this year has been, just time just, I don't know, filtering out. And I guess I've achieved a fair few things over this year. Back in the summer, I had, 40 followers on Twitter and 0 views here and there. It was just 0 everything pretty much. So we've built a little kind of thing, and hopefully this next year we'll gradually grow it.
Well, I think if you keep up quality content like that, it's going to be picked up by some big user at one point, and then he or she tweets it out, and then it gets picked up, and then the snowball starts rolling. I think Zuby, he was already happening a little bit, but then Joe Rogan talked about the clip he put on his Twitter where he lifts the weight and he says he identifies as a woman, so I now hold the women's record for deadlift in the UK. Yeah. And he talked about it, and boom, that gets seen by 20 million people.
Millions.
Yeah. And there you go.
It's just one little clip like that could I don't know, set the snowball really going really.
Yeah, but he had been working at it for almost 10 years before that happened. So it's like that quote, I think it's Michael Jordan or something. Overnight success takes 10 years of really hard work, and
Yeah. I think it's very true. Whenever you hear these sort of overnight success stories, there's generally a big long story behind it.
Yeah.
The build up, or even if it's just sort of what me and the producer have been doing, just crafting, trying to get it to the highest quality we can, or I don't know, finding some sort of niche which we think we found, and then just doubling down on it really and sticking to the plan. And then obviously if something pops up, we'll reorient or redirect. But yeah, we'll just have to see really. And basically you just got to keep persisting, grinding on promotion and whatnot, which I've been a bit lax with over this couple of weeks.
Well, it's the hard part, It's you don't only have to make good content, you also have to be a marketing person, and marketing is a whole different kind of thing than creating music, And I'm not saying you can't be good at it at the same time, but it's, kind of being a guitar player and a mechanic at the same time or something. It's just two different things.
Yeah, precisely. We're picking up sort of ideas here and there, but the marketing it's basically just kind of right now we're throwing stuff at the wall and trying to see what sticks, what works, and things that I thought maybe didn't work do work, and then thought things that I sort of thought might be a good idea turn out not to be. But anyway, yeah. I think we got to the third verse, did we? Or what? How do you want to run this, or what do you want to do?
Well, I mean, if you're cool. I'm fine with leaving the little intro we had so far in there as well. I mean,
yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
So, yeah, man. We talked for quite a long time the last time, and then we both
3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, we both got tired after that because it was quite it was pretty difficult stuff that we were talking about, and then we also talked about some trips you made to Russia and stuff, and you visited the gulags there, and it was intense stuff, and 3 hours of that is pretty tiring. And then the third verse of your song we had yet to discuss, which was the most difficult part of the entire song.
I think so, yeah. It's at least the most sort of conceptually dense part. And I mean, I've got a rough idea of like what I'd say. A lot of these ideas have been bubbling around in my head for years through various readings and whatnot. And then just this song probably took, I think it was a year that I just sort of kept adding to it here and there. Like I never sat down and said, write this song. It was always just like little lyrics here and there that I'd come to. And then it was a slow sort of jigsaw puzzle that all just fit in. Whereas some songs I'll sit down and actually say, write a song like what I'm doing now on cancel culture and censorship. Whereas this was just sort of throw loads of ideas together and then really tweak and polish the rhyme schemes so that basically every syllable in the rhymes are like rhyming. So yeah, it was quite a long build up. I've generally got about like 10, 20 songs always on the go at once, just being added to, and then we'll find a topic that needs to be discussed or we think would be good to be discussed because it's maybe like popping or whatever.
Right.
And then just focus on that.
How long would you say you worked on this song? Like when did the basic idea start and when did it finish? I'm always fascinated by that kind of process.
Yeah, it was about it, like probably, I don't know when I started it, like maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. Because I know I've had that second verse. That second verse had been finished for at least a year. So that second verse, like I used to use it as a verse, like what I call like a sort of fill-in verse, in which when the producer sends me a beat, I'll have a store of verses that like let me know what the tempo is, that let me know like how to deliver like a rap to it, a lyric to it. So that verse that they began to await goblins, blah, 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 all the way to the bit where I talk about like gender identity and all that. I've had that for a year in its solid final form.
Wow.
The rest basically just came, like I say, in bits and bobs. It was like a jigsaw puzzle that slowly sort of formed in the last year, really. And then I sat down just, I think, around July or August and just tweaked all the missing bits. Generally, if you look at a lot of my lyric documents, all the content is there already. What's missing is rhymes and the structure that sort of undergirds the song itself. So a lot of the lines will exist. Like I don't know, I'm looking at that there. Masculinity was deemed toxic is a line in this third verse, and then I'll find a rhyme for it, such as like deemed. I'll the ending rhyme will be like deemed toxic, and I'll match the vowels for that, so like weak logic,
right? And
then masculinity will match with masked their bigotry. So I've got two rhyme schemes working at the same time.
That's pretty brilliant. Yeah, that's
masculinity is rhyming with masked their bigotry. So it's that's the vowel rhyme scheme. And every line is like that. So obesity became body positivity. That speech would be is rhyming with obesity. Became is rhyming with restrained, and body positivity is rhyming with was a probability.
That's
obesity
pretty.
Became.
I'm always impressed by that. Like how do you yeah, like how do you? I guess it's the same as asking an author, like how do you write a book? You know, it's hard to explain, but yeah, those are pretty complicated rhymes that I wouldn't come up with that.
Yeah, it's sort of the technique that evolved in rap over like years, really. Going back to like the late 80s, people like Big Daddy Kane and Rakim were doing what was called like this multi-syllable rhyming. So instead of just rhyming cat with mat, with hat, with bat or whatever, they take something like snap back and rhyme the two syllables. So it wouldn't just be like back rhyming with like hack or whatever. Snap back, flat cap, Baghdad, rat pack. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then
right.
then they'd stack these rhymes, and it would basically create like either a verse or a rhythm for a number of bars in the song.
Cool.
And then over the years, it just like got more and more complicated. People like I think by the sort of 2010s, a lot of people were rhyming. Well, not a lot of people, but a few people were rhyming every syllable in the line, or trying to anyway.
When did you get started with rapping? Like, who's a big inspiration to you?
But my favorite rappers are all the cliche sort of big ones, really, like Tupac, Jay-Z, Eminem, Biggie, Nas, or DMX. I liked a lot of the older people like Slick Rick, Common. I loved Kanye West's earlier stuff, and I think his best album was that My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which had a massive sort of influence on me at the time when it came out. I had tons of rappers, really. The first CD I ever bought was 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying. So that had a massive influence on me as a sort of, I think I was 13 when that came out.
I remember when that came out.
It was 2003, so I would have been, 13. So a little teen. But yeah, the big influences have all been Tupac, Eminem, Jay-Z, Nas, and Biggie, I would say, which is ultra cliche. They're the big rappers that everyone's sort of influenced by, but nonetheless,
I mean, every most or a whole lot of big rock bands today say that they get their inspiration from Led Zeppelin. You know, it's a standard answer, but it's a good answer.
Yeah, precisely. I think there's a reason why these bands and these artists are the most influential. It's because they have the largest catalogs. They had a lot to say in their sort of heyday. And they changed the art form in some way or other, or they left a huge imprint on it. So, and I think as a kid, when you're listening to all that, like a lot of it sticks with you. So obviously Eminem and Jay-Z were quite complex with the way they structured rhyming and the way they sort of layered the verses and whatnot. So I think a lot of the technical aspects come from them. And then other rappers like Tech-9 and I mean, there's so many. I could go on about it for days, to be honest. The main influence came from the battling stuff that I used to do back in my early 20s. The battle stuff was very, very technical. It was based around stacking what were called multis. And so a lot of it was geared towards being technical.
Okay, so you have to basically diss each other, right? When you
pretty much, yeah. It was the cliche reference is 8 Mile. I don't know if you've seen that. Eminem film.
Long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, that's the cliche reference. Around about the mid 2000s, battle rap switched from being on beat. So there were no beats, and it switched to being a cappella, which basically freed up the art form and made it even more complicated. And so I went into it, I think 2011 or 2012. And then I was on the scene for a couple of years, something like that. And then I backed away from it due to various things that were going on in my personal life at the time. But those 2 years were sort of the heyday of battle rap, especially in Britain here.
How would a battle rap event, how does that go? Like, do you just show up and you is it like an MMA fight? Like you have like a pair, or is it like you got three rounds and the finale and stuff? Or
the structure was it would be a cappella, so there would be there was no beat. So you'd write for your opponent. You'd know who your opponent was going to be, like a month maybe in advance. And then you do all your sort of internet online research, and then you'd write basically poetry for this other man, but nasty poetry. And then you'd show up on the day, like, and there'd be like a bunch of different battles going on. And yeah, you deliver your 3 rounds. It was set into 3 rounds. Like sometimes they were timed, sometimes you could go on as long as you wanted. And you deliver these 3 rounds dissing your opponent in as sort of like you'd mix like jokes with sort of seriousness, with like technicality, with rhythm, all sorts of stuff. It was quite big at the time. It's still big now. I think in the UK here it sort of died its death I don't know, about like 2-3 years ago, but it still sort of drags on a bit here and there. But I backed away from all that around 2015, 2014, I think. And then sort of just I found different interests and went off and did other stuff basically. But yeah, it was an interesting period in my life, at least.
And it gave you the tools to do what you do now.
Pretty much, yeah. I had a lot of flaws back then as well, like in how I structured rhyming and whatnot. I'd often rhyme a lot of gibberish, sort of nonsensical things that didn't really make sense, or things that you wouldn't say. And that was one of the criticisms I used to get quite frequently. So, I took all the criticisms on board over the years and then basically polished them up so that now I feel like I've fused my sort of reading, which came from like the philosophers like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and all these writers that I love, like Camus and Sartre and all of them, fused that sort of actually the requirement to say something with the technicality and the structure that I sort of picked up from battle rapping and from the people and the rappers I listened to over the years. Yeah. So it's sort of that fusion. But I think Schopenhauer, the philosopher, said the first rule of writing is you need to have something to say. Back then, I don't think I really had anything to say. And a lot of like battle rap stuff is all you're doing is basically deconstructing your opponent, or trying to take apart their character, take apart their sort of behavior, their actions, their style of rapping, or their persona in a sense. So it doesn't, beyond that, it doesn't really have much to say. It's a purely sort of negative, nihilistic sort of thing where you're trying to destroy someone or something.
Right.
So
what made you get into this subject? What was the trigger for you to start writing about this subject? I mean, it's quite a, it's not the only person I know out there who sort of does the same thing as Zuby, but he seems to be more into the motivational stuff, and I think like more aggressively attack all the craziness that's going on.
I think that's accurate to say. He's very much into sort of he's got his book, hasn't he? And yeah, the motivational side. Whereas I don't know, I'm more interested in the sort of philosophical underpinnings of it all and the history behind these movements and how this stuff has risen so powerfully in the last, especially the last 5 years. It was always around to some extent. And it's a mixture of different waves that have been going on for at least a few decades. The sort of left-wing identitarianism was always a part of the left, but many different parts of the left were never identitarians. They never looked at themselves as these sort of identity categories, and they were the defining characteristics and whatnot. The left has always had these struggles against racism, sexism, different forms of phobia, etc. So, I mean, that's always been a feature on the left, but it was never the defining characteristic. The left that I knew, or the left that I sort of read heavily on in my younger years, was more concerned with class and more concerned with sort of like state power and how it was structured and how it was used in various ways. They still have that to some extent, but now it's set through the sort of race and gender filter, the lens of race and gender. And this transformation, it was a transformation in sort of the mainstream left. I think it came around the early 2010s, and we sort of saw it start to creep in, at least I did. And then by 2015, it's really blown up like massively, and it's become the sort of reigning model on the left, and it's taken over much of the left wing, what they call the discourse.
Right.
It's become the central defining characteristic of what the public, what the right wingers, and what pretty much all the left themselves regard as leftism. There were warnings and there were forebodings of this stuff happening. An article was written in 2013, I think it was, by a guy called Mark Fisher. He was sort of like one of the older school class-based Marxist types. He wrote an article called Exiting the Vampire Castle.
I'm sorry, it glitched a little bit.
It was called Exiting the Vampire Castle.
Okay.
So the things he talks about in that article are pretty much the things I talk about in this third verse of this song. This idea that the propagation of guilt and then this switch on the left towards like race and gender and sexuality being the core themes that are driving all sort of leftist thought, basically. He was like an old school class-based sort of Marxist. Can you call him a Marxist? Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I used to read quite heavily of a lot of leftist writers. I still do, but he wrote that article, and it was a very sort of accurate appraisal of what was going on at the time. He looked at, ironically, like figures such as Owen Jones, who had been sort of hit on by the cancel cult mob, or the early days, what would later become what we know now as this cancel culture. Obviously, at the time, it was called call-out culture.
Who is Owen Jones?
Owen Jones is he's like he's a writer for The Guardian, a journalist. He's a big sort of figure on the sort of British left, like socialist, etc. But and he was, back in the day, at least his early books, like Chavs was one of his early books, and also a book called The Establishment, which he wrote, which went sort of viral in bookland. It was an analysis of, like, his books were like an analysis of class in Britain and how the different class structures sort of like prioritize, or what they would call privilege, certain peoples and whatnot. But even Owen Jones has been sucked into this, precisely the type of thing that Mark Fisher talks about in the essay, this obsession with race and gender and sexuality, and then the propagation of guilt surrounding these things, the sort of patronizing mobs that I think that social media and the way social media is structured nowadays has given rise to. A lot of the old internet culture was massively different back in the 2000s, and then this switch to sort of the Twitter format, this short little bite-sized gobbet snippet style kind of way of discussing issues, which is always just tiny little bits that you get from someone, and then you judge someone based on one, like 140 or whatever, 280 characters or whatever it is. And everyone's got their own individualized feeds. So everyone's just reading what they basically agree with. They're in their little ecosystems, in their little bubbles.
Yeah, and then recently they added the feature that you can only allow comments from people you want to comment on. So you can have this horrible take and just shut down and just turn off the comments, and it's like, yep, whatever.
Yeah. It's cultivated this sense of sort of stratification, the people being sort of like pushed into their little identity categories, their little tribes, their online sects, and you rarely see like this cross-aisle discussion. The early internet was, at least when I was on it, it was all based on like bulletin boards and forums and stuff, and you go on, a bit like Reddit, but even now Reddit is sort of
super political,
and not like, you go on the politics board on Reddit and it's just one mentality. One mentality. You go and I went and posted the song on the Nietzsche subreddit, and the Nietzsche subreddit ironically has been taken over by loads of sort of woke types. And it's like in relation to Nietzsche, who I can't imagine Nietzsche being a fan of wokeism. But back in the day, it was this sort of like war of like, you go on a forum and whatnot, and you'd have your arsenal, your armory of facts or whatever it is you wanted to go and discuss, and it was generally to do with like religion or government and whatnot. And then you'd go and meet some ultra like Christian evangelical and discuss the Bible with them, or you'd go and talk to anarchists over here and then Marxists over there, or conservatives and whatnot. And people used to like exchange these massive long essays basically. And that's how it worked. Whereas obviously the switch around about 2010, I think 2011, lent itself to this sort of dumbed down, like minuscule snippet based, like just basically diving onto someone's comments and then dunking on them,
right? And then blocking you.
And then they implement mass block lists and all the rest of it, which is telling, I think. Like the types of people who use these mass block lists, I don't know, like often they're political, and they're very, like, a lot of the people are on the left, and I always think it's a reflection of how someone would govern if they were given power. They just block people or like ostracize them completely. I'm against that, like in general, really. Like there's a lot of people that have come on my Twitter and whatever, said this or that about the songs, and I'm not really bothered, to be fair. I just let them get on with it. I just mute them generally.
Right.
But if they're persistently sort of annoying, I think, you don't want to see some nonsense every day. But
have you gotten threats yet? Or
I've had a few little death threats come in on the DMs, but I don't know. Like back in the battle rap stuff kind of trained me to not really care that much, at least, about what a bunch of randomers on the internet said, because there's always going to be this sort of party of what you could call them haters, and it's just inevitable. You're going to get the criticisms, and you're going to get the internet. Obviously, like, people are behind this veil of anonymities, or at least like semi-anonymity. You can't, like, go and talk to the person,
right?
So people are much more free to just lambast a figure or a person and whatnot. I think that's been sort of the growing pains of the last 10 years, really, this new structure. I can't stand the word structure because, like, all these types use it all the time. But yeah, a new superstructure has sort of been built, the internet, how it functions now. The way social media is nothing like it was in the early 2000s. I mean, social media didn't really even exist back then. And it's categorized people into their little sects, into their little tribes. And this has bled over into real life, into real politics. And it's basically separated the two peoples, or the multiple, like, little tribes that bandy about each other, into massively different camps who are not talking the same language, which is quite evident. One side's talking about problematic discourse, structural, systemic this and all the rest of it. And then the others are basically criticizing all that. Right. So they're talking different languages, at least in America and Britain. I don't know what it's like in Europe. I would suspect it's probably somewhat similar, because American culture just pumps itself everywhere, basically.
Yeah, we're usually a couple of years behind what happens over there, good and bad. You know.
Yeah.
So it's starting to creep into the discourse here a little bit too, and you know they've let some people with some crazy ideas on TV, and you know, and it's a late.
I mean, I think you're always going to have that to some extent. I just think the way the internet is, the way the internet works now, with these few sort of like Facebook, Twitter, and then a few of the other sort of blogging platforms, which are sort of, I would say, dying now, like Tumblr. Or maybe they're not. Maybe I'm just not wired into what's going on in them and whatnot. But
it's just, I think Tumblr is like a hard left echo chamber, kind of like 4chan is like a hard right echo chamber, I guess.
Pretty much, yeah. I think that's just sort of, even though, like, to be fair, like 4chan is where a lot of these sort of libertarian leftist movements of the early 2010. This is what's so ironic about 4chan. It's become synonymous with these sort of Pepe the Frog, white nationalists, at least sympathizing types, right. Or the nihilism that sort of exists on the right. Whereas it produced all these movements, these libertarian movements, the left-wing libertarian, like Anonymous came from 4chan, like this sort of hacktivist group that were protesting everything from Scientology to like government force and state power and all the rest of it. So yeah, this switch, like 4chan basically, I think, reacted to all the Tumblr echo chamber identitarian stuff, which has taken over the left, right. Which is, I think is inarguable that the left is not obsessed with race, gender, pronouns, inclusion, etc. All these sort of new shibboleths that, well, not new, but yeah, these ideas that have basically gained massive currency in the last 10 years, especially. I think because they've been co-opted by mainstream organizations such as the New York Times or the Washington Post and whatnot, and then just been pumped everywhere.
Yeah, I really wonder what happened with those newspapers. I remember that the New York Times used to be like a well-respected news organization, and you could expect quality from there and just proper journalism. But some of the stuff I've seen on there is just nuts, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's like The Guardian a bit as well. I used to read The Guardian in my sort of, this must have been about 2007, 2008. It's massively altered, changed completely. I think just, it's this new issue, like race and gender are these sort of central defining issues of our little era here. In the same way, I think back in 2000, in the 2000s, sort of religion.
Right. I remember that was a hot topic back then. Like there was... It
was huge, especially on the internet, yeah. Like the internet sort of geared a lot of the discussion that bled over everywhere. And I think, like, obviously 9/11 sort of sparked off that kind of stuff. And then obviously Bush was in power and he was considered like an evangelical Christian and whatnot. And then obviously it was the sort of heyday of Al-Qaeda and whatnot. And then the hunt for bin Laden, etc. And then the rise of all this sort of atheist discourse on again, I'm using like the sort of modern discourse is a very sort of Foucauldian term. Well, obviously then you had new atheism as well rise around like 2006, 2007. And then it basically created these celebrities in like Richard Dawkins, Hitchens and whatnot.
What is new atheism?
it was like a new sort of wave of atheism that I guess started with Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, or at least that was the cardinal the cardinal event that sort of sparked off this new wave. It had been bubbling for a while. The internet was awash with stuff about atheism and religion, and a really good article actually written by that Slate Star Codex blogger guy, New Atheism, I think it was called The Godlessness That Failed. The internet was awash with all these discussions about religion versus atheism. And so a lot of the sort of early intellectuals of the internet, you should read that article, New Atheism, The Godlessness That Failed.
Slate Star Codex. Let's see.
It's quite a long article, so you might need to dedicate like a half an hour to it or whatever. But it's very interesting.
Oh, that is a big article with some stats on it. Looks like I see those graphs that you also. I see one of those graphs that you posted. The word usage from the New York Times.
That's where I got it from. Yeah, I've got it up here actually. Yeah. In the article, he talks about how this sort of this early internet argument culture, which had sort of risen with the earlier users of the internet, who were generally sort of intellectual, tech-savvy types, who now had the chance to sort of meet up and basically argue with people all over the world about these subjects that they could never really discuss, because either they might be in New York and they'd just be surrounded by people who agree with them, or they might be out in, I don't know, some place in the Midwest America who are like a heavily religious community, etc. But now people had the chance to sort of meet up and discuss all this stuff. I remember I was in my teens when all this stuff was going on, so I was massively, heavily influenced by a lot of the discussions that had happened, and people have built these sites, these big sort of stockpiles of arguments and all sorts. He talks about how if you needed a hit piece on a certain passage in the Bible, there'd be like 20 million pages full of sort of arguments pointing out the contradictions of this passage in the Bible, etc.
Right.
One of the big, it was all like, a lot of it was a reaction to Bush and the perceived like creationist movement. But I think by the time like it had its own celebrities like Dawkins and Hitchens and obviously Sam Harris was one of the celebrities that rose with this period. Daniel Dennett and others as well, like who then later some of them switched over and they felt that religion was responsible for all the like sordid things that we look at in history: racism, sexism, classism, like homophobia. They thought religion, it was a very simple explanation. Religion's to blame, basically.
Right.
And so a lot of them switched over, he argues, to basically adopting a lot of this social justice activism around 2010, 2011. And obviously a lot of these people had influence over people who worked at the New York Times or the Washington Post or wherever. And so slowly, like just as all the religious discussions had bled into the mainstream narrative, wherever you look, you know, whether it be the Guardian in Britain or the Times or even like the Telegraph, suddenly the new focus was on race, gender, sexuality, etc., and the sort of the effects of discrimination related to these things. And then by 2015, you've got this huge sort of movement, which that graph like kind of like shows quite clearly, I think, just the rise in word usage frequency of all these terms: systemic racism, institutional racism, toxic masculinity, privilege, etc., cultural appropriation, microaggressions, trauma, like words such as discourse, problematic, social constructs, diversity, inclusion, implicit bias, etc. Just this huge spike in the early 2010s that, I don't know, like a parasite, it just took over everyone's mind, and that became their only sort of preoccupation. And now we're obviously in the sort of, I think, the heyday of this movement.
There's some words that are like new, like mansplaining, toxic masculinity. If you look at those graphs, those words were just invented in the last 10 years, and then they just pop up, and then boom.
Yeah.
They
just massively, they rose, like, because the emphasis switched onto from deconstructing religious idiocies or religious like dogma or religious ignorance over the ages, etc. And then the sort of elites, the intellectual elites who had grown up during this early internet argument culture, switch over to talking about race, and this became the new bugbear. And obviously they adopted a lot of the social justice sort of scholarship that had built over the decades and pushed it massively everywhere.
I think we talked about it the first time we talked. It started with like the French intellectuals, right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the, like, there is a tendency, which I do agree with some of the critics, there's a tendency to blame it on Foucault or Derrida, etc. I don't think they're to blame for these things. I think, like, what's happened is a lot of their language and a lot of their devices and techniques and the way they look at things became popular and slowly got adopted by more and more university departments who became influenced by people like Foucault. You read a passage from Foucault or Derrida, and you'll spot the word problematic within the first 2 minutes of reading it. You'll spot the word discourse. These words have like bled very much into the way we talk now, just in general. And in my view, I don't think there's any other explanation that it came from these philosophers. It's been a slow creep that's spread its sort of wings everywhere.
Why is their philosophy so attractive to so many people?
Because I think it looks at power structures and how power functions in human society. And they had Foucault had quite a lot of interesting things to say. I always find him a bit sort of I don't know, puzzling, or at least like inconclusive. There was a famous debate actually happened on a Dutch TV program back in I don't know when it was, Foucault versus Chomsky. So Noam Chomsky was the sort of from the scientific empirical left, and Foucault is on the left, no doubt, but more concerned with, his topics, which were power, knowledge, truth, sexuality was one of his big topics. And he was very much obsessed with what he called spatialized thinking, which he got from Nietzsche. He wanted to tell history in a different way. I can't remember if I talked about this last time. His obsession was, sorry?
Human nature and the ideal society. I think I found it.
Yeah, so they discuss the discussion is a bit sort of perplexing, really, and it doesn't really get to any sort of, there's no conclusive argument. It's not like the sort of duel that you expect it to be. It's just two people who have a very different conception of what human nature is. Chomsky believes in a human nature. He thinks human nature is a thing and that we can measure it on an empirical basis to some extent. And Foucault isn't even interested in that idea. What he's interested in is the idea that human nature, like, functions as a mechanism of power, the idea of it. Right. So when we talk about human nature, we're like, there's always some sort of discourse, which is the reigning discourse, the reigning idea. And we talk about it a certain way because of that framing. We don't ask certain questions about certain things. We negate, like, certain viewpoints, etc. So all his philosophy is about asking these sorts of questions, like how is the idea of human nature function? How does human nature, like, whose benefit does this idea work for, etc. It's a puzzling way of thinking. That's why its popularity is owing to sort of these sort of questions that never get asked, which I think there's always a place for these questions to be asked. Of course, like certain people get hold of these ideas and then create the crackpot idea that there is no human nature and there is no this or that, or there is no truth, there's no idea, there's no way we can empirically measure that. Whereas Foucault didn't really say that. He was just questioning the concept.
Well, but you could make the argument against the philosophy itself then. You could say the idea of constructionism is also a constructed idea. So it's kind of a flawed, or am I missing something?
So yeah, it's like circular logic, really. You don't get anywhere with it. It's inconclusive, as I say. It's sort of, if everything is, or pretty much everything we take for granted is a product of social construction, if we are, and this construction is through various discourses that have been going on for maybe, I don't know, centuries sometimes, and our ideas about things derive from these conversations that we've had over the centuries, or even just the last few years, or just even amongst our family or peer group. And these are basically slowly built up over time. We either inherit these constructions, or we build them amongst ourselves. Then the very idea of that itself has to be a social construction as well. So you've socially constructed the very idea of these socially constructed narratives. If you know what I mean, or
yeah. I mean, but that seems to be not a good theory then, because you can use the theory against itself.
Yeah, precisely. And well, this is what a lot of that wave of philosophy ultimately results in. Like Derrida's object was to sort of look at language and find out like that language actually has no like actual feasible basis. It's all based in metaphysics. It's all every word that we use and every word that we have. We use the word dog, and it's tied. We think it's tied to a dog, or to a concept and whatnot, but we can never get to the actual thing. It's just like this ghost, this phantom, this sort of signifier, which is like a stopgap. So his charge was that all language is problematic, as he would call it, in this way. It's all based on a metaphysics. It has no grounding. And yeah, like, where'd you go with that? Like, I mean, you can use it as a device for looking at certain things. Like, for instance, we look at how, I don't know, like the common charge is that, for instance, if I go traveling somewhere in Australia, for instance, I would be regarded as an expat. Right. Whereas if a Muslim guy from wherever, Pakistan, goes traveling in Australia and goes to live there, he'd be regarded as an immigrant. Right. So this different, what they argued was this different emphasis on certain words, and how these words basically are like not really in reference to anything solid, not really anything that you can actually get at, if you know what I mean. I'm not explaining this very clearly. I need to explain it to myself a bit. But you know what I'm trying to suggest, or
you mean like people have a preconceived notion of things based on something that's arbitrary, maybe, or
yeah, it goes like deeper than that. This is what all the sort of post-structuralist stuff do. I mean, it's very sort of complex. I can't say I understand all of it, and I can't say that I've read all of the material related to it. I've read Grammatology, which is Derrida's like first major book, and I've read a load of his other stuff as well. And I've read most of Foucault's stuff, but I mean, they're very different, Foucault and Derrida. But yeah, anyway, so this stuff, I think, bled into the general way of talking about things.
Right.
And we see that very clearly, like the use of certain terms really goes to these philosophers. And I think undergirding our values are a lot of these concepts which were born in this post-World War II sort of phase.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, I'm not as well versed in the whole subject as you, but I find I don't really, well, I do know why, but when people start messing with language, that creeps me out big time. And you know, so when that started happening, and when these neologisms, when those things start to show up, and if you don't necessarily take them seriously, or even dare to ask, like, well, what's that based on? Like, who came up with that word, or who came up with that concept? You were instantly like shut down, or put in a corner, or called all kinds of horrible names, like a bigot or whatever. When that happens, that's creepy. That's
it's sort of cult-like, really, isn't it? And
yeah, like, obey, join us, and if you don't, we're gonna do everything to destroy your career, try to get you canceled, basically. Yeah,
you're immoral, or you're excommunicated.
Yeah,
sort of like the article I was talking about earlier, Mark Fisher's article. It comes from and what I talk about in this third verse, the desire to excommunicate, the desire to sort of condemn or vilify those who don't meet your morality. Well, they've developed their own little moral system, and then those who don't meet it, and many are not going to meet it, simply because you've acquired it from elite universities generally. You've acquired it from a peer group who are what they would describe as privileged, and they are trying to propagate like people to like propagate guilt, to basically bully people into accepting their moral value system. That's the way I see it anyway.
Right.
And so they'll use all manner of techniques and devices, like linguistic, or whether it be psychological, etc., to make people ultimately feel bad about themselves and to bow down to their value system, to make their values the values for everyone. I think that's the object. It's a cult-like mentality. It's precisely how sort of all these like cults, like, I don't know, Scientology function.
Right. It's totalitarian. It's
they want to totalize everything. They want to bring everyone into the totality of their sort of little moral system.
Right.
And anyone outside of that is a heretic, or anyone is punishable. So if I question certain ideas, just question the idea of, I think they're using the term privilege completely incorrectly. They've stripped the idea of class away from privilege, and privilege now has come to be defined as things related to race, gender, and sexuality, etc. I think this is completely wrong. It's completely false. They've basically rendered the word inaccurate in every sense. The word privilege, I think I mentioned last time, is in reference to laws. It's in reference to like things that you can actually measure, like the idea of a law being in place that privileges a certain person over someone else.
Right.
Not all of these privileges are negative. The idea that, I don't know, that we put ramps outside hospitals for disabled people, that, like, I think linguistically is a privilege. It's a law passed to accommodate a certain person for a certain thing. Right. That's what would be described as a privilege, in a sense. Obviously, like, you could accurately describe apartheid South Africa as a system of white privilege, because there were laws in place that created favorable conditions or accommodated only white people. Right. So you could accurately describe that. If there are laws in place that do it, then you can call it privilege accurately, correctly. Whereas if there aren't laws, or if your laws are vague and you're talking about structural or systemic hangovers, etc., and so on and so forth, then you really need to get specific with what these things are, because people who may not have your elite education from your studies degree at whatever university you've gone to are not going to understand what you're talking about when you're talking about systemic power, etc.
So and not everyone agrees. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry?
No.
Yeah, sorry. Go on.
Finish your thought, please.
Yeah, I was finished. Sorry, I'm just rambling basically.
It's good. It's like the delay again that gets in our way, you know. What I wanted to add was and not only does not everyone have the same education from that same university, a lot of people might disagree and have very good arguments against that idea, but if they want to bring it up, the reaction is to shut them down.
Yeah, precisely. I think, and that happens wherever. Like, if I was arguing this, I don't know what I've just said there, would be shut down pretty much instantly anywhere or if I posted it on Twitter, etc., it might gain a bit of currency with a certain types, but it would be roundly lambasted by people, and people wouldn't engage in the discussion, or things are not up for discussion in their world. Like, some subjects are cordoned off and not allowed to be talked about. I've always been like, I don't know, like a lot of my sort of emphasis on free speech ideas came from the old left, really, like the Chomsky types who were always in favor of complete free speech.
Yeah, I think that, you know, free speech I think free speech is to prevent like violence from happening, and you know, as long as we can talk about stuff, we don't have to beat each other up or kill each other, you know.
Precisely. I think that's ultimately what it's for. It's the ability to be able to meet and discuss certain things that perhaps are not comfortable for certain types of people here or there or wherever. But everyone has to bow down to if everyone has to bow down to a certain moral system, and you're gonna build up a bunch of repressed ideas, repressed sentiment, which are sort of contorted and distorted. And if they're going on certain comment sections on certain websites here or there, they're just going to be bombarded with their own stuff. They never subject these ideas to public scrutiny. They never let these ideas meet other ideas in combat. Like at least that's the idea, the theory behind free speech. And so, yeah, you basically create these splinter factions that are separated from each other. These little like ostracized ecosystems, echo chambers,
right?
And ultimately it results in shocks to the system, because one side will vote a certain way, and if there's a majority in favor of that, you get Brexit, you'll get Trump, you'll get populism, etc.
Right.
So I mean, that's how I see it. Maybe that's wrong, or maybe it's not subtle enough, but.
Well, one thing that disturbs me mostly about this is that it comes from universities and even very highly acclaimed universities that are, you know, that are just legendary and highly regarded, that produce some of the biggest thinkers that have ever walked the planet. And now in those places they're talking about safe spaces, and they're talking about and they're banning people from showing up and speaking because they disagree with what they have to say. And you know, and that's when that happens, that just it scares me, it disgusts me, and it in my opinion it's exact opposite what should be happening at universities. Like, you're supposed to go there to have all your ideas challenged and all your bad ideas destroyed basically in the arena of free thought and free speech, and the only you should want to have your ideas get defeated by better ideas, and the fact that the exact opposite is happening at even universities like Oxford and stuff now, that's scary to me.
I think that this wave is also with the sort of rollout of mass university attendance, really, the sort of corporatization of the universities. They've all become businesses, or at least that's what it looks like to me. And their objective is to get as many people like applying to their university, etc. And so university attendance has just risen massively. And obviously tuition fees were like amped up in Britain at least by 3 times as much as it was 10 years ago. So these universities are all functioning like businesses now. And it so happens that this stuff is quite profitable. If you're, I don't know, running a gender studies degree, etc., you can like recruit a bunch of people to come and study that, etc. And so no one's really studying. Loads of people are studying like heavy subjects like the STEM subjects, or going deep on, I don't know, psychology or whatever,
or mathematics, But
now there's just this like rafter of I don't know how to describe it, like just crap basically.
It's not science. It's not
nonsense.
Yeah,
nonsense degrees that I don't know. That have no utility or value. Ultimately, they might make you think about certain things in a certain way, but they're not gonna, I don't know, really build you as a person in any way. I think, the main problem with the universities, as far as I see, is the sort of this corporate this viewing the universities themselves as businesses. Maybe they have to do that to some extent, and maybe the switch to that has been, I don't know, contributed to what we see now, with massive amounts more of people going to university. And
by the way, when did we decide that everyone has to go to university? I mean, there's a lot of people.
My view as well.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is my view as well. Not everyone is, do you know what I mean, geared for university, for the environment that you sort of described there, which I think should be the sort of university environment where you go to put your ideas to the test, and then to basically learn loads of new ideas that allow you to function or allow you to write or research in whichever field that you eventually go towards.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, it's not sustainable really, ultimately, because all these kids now have got like £50,000 worth of debt. And now they've all emerged from the universities with this. They're pissed off. And
they get a degree that doesn't get them a job, or like...
Yeah, precisely. They're in precisely the same place that someone like me would have been. Like I went to university just for like a few months, and then I dropped out because I viewed it back in 2008 as just nonsense at the time, and then went traveling. So I didn't even really go to university. They've completed their courses. They've got 50 grand or however much worth of debt now. And it obviously has led to a rise in neurotic worry, anxiety, etc. They've got this cloud hanging over them. They've subscribed to all the race, gender, sexuality codswallop. They've, they're in precisely the same place they would have been in had they not gone to university.
With 50,000 in debt, and they're pissed off. Yeah.
Precisely. So, I don't blame the kids, really.
I'd be angry too, but at one point, I followed one course actually of like gender studies. Like I didn't know when I signed up for it, to be honest. It was I was an exchange student in the US for one semester, and I did I followed a sociology class. I just had to get an X amount of credit to that would carry over to my normal university career, college career, I should say. I didn't get a master's degree, but I signed up for this class called Gender and Communication because I thought, well, I'm studying for a business BA business degree, and this might give some interesting insight in how to advertise to men and women in different ways and what to pay attention to. Basically, it was just one course, one semester, kind of like a primer, if you will. But it was this full-on, hardcore gender study stuff, and I had to buy this book. I forget the name of it, but it was just a series of very angry essays of what it's like to be like a black transgender lesbian in the hood, or what it's like to be I don't know, but it was sort of that sort of stuff, or a woman working on an oil rig, and she was also a lesbian, I think, and there was there was someone who had his legs missing, and he was also like homosexual, and he identified as it was all that sort of stuff, and they were all very angry essays and just stories about how unfair the world is to them and how horrible everything is. And that was basically the basic course material, and then there was this sort of it was some sort of a play we had to attend. It wasn't a play, or I guess you could call it. It was called the Vagina Monologues.
All right, yeah, that's very famous. Yeah,
and
who was it who wrote that?
I forget, man. I remember going in there and watching that, and I was like, "What the fuck is this?" I was like, "What am I watching?" It was some of the
reaction, they'd say.
Yeah, yeah, of course. That's what a guy would say. So therefore, it's a patriarchal reaction, and therefore, it's invalid. I guess.
When were you doing this?
What
year?
It was 2011. Let's see. Let me go.
Okay, so yeah, the early days of sort of the proliferation of all this kind of stuff. It's always been around, but yeah.
Eve Ensler wrote it, the Vagina Monologues, and it's basically just a monologue by different vaginas, I guess. And I was like, at first I was kind of, I don't know. It started out, I thought it was some kind of a comedy sketch, and then I thought, oh no, these people are actually serious about this. And then I got interested, and then at the end I just kind of walked out like confused, like, all right, I guess this is what people talk about in universities over here, and I failed that class because, but it was weird, and I just walked out confused and disturbed. I didn't really get it. I didn't get the point of it, and the one thing that I mostly took away from it was, I don't think this is what we're supposed to learn at university. I thought we were here to actually learn critical thinking, and there was also I think they also had like a mathematics lab, and I talked to people there, and talk about these crazy theories, and they kind of explained that stuff to me, and I don't know nothing about that. I don't know anything about that, and I was just kind of having my mind blown by trying to understand that kind of stuff, and that contrast between those things. I was like, what's going on here? Like why is this stuff also here? This is weird. This is nonsense. And yeah.
Yeah, no. And what university was that you were at?
It was in Florida. It was University of West Florida.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think. I didn't follow it. So, like the trajectory. I think around then was when I was doing all the battle stuff. So, or at least I'd come back from abroad. So,
but that's the first.
Kind of,
yeah, that was the first time I ever, got in touch with it, and then I just kind of forgot about it, and it was just kind of a funny, weird memory for a long time, and then a couple of years later, it suddenly started coming back, and I was like, I've seen this shit kind of brewing, and
I think that was around then, 2010, 2011 was the sort of when it proliferated, I think, and started spreading out bit by bit, and then got adopted by the mainstream. And by 2014, it resulted in some sort of major controversies, such as the GamerGate stuff, which is just, what
was
madness.
that about? I never really. It was like gaming journalists, and there was one journalist who fucked a bunch of journalists to have like a good rating on their games or something. Was it something like that?
I think what sparked it all off, like from my feeble knowledge of it, I think it was some girl had split up with some guy, and they were involved in like some game blogging journalism or something, or some internet site. I don't know the names of it, and then the guy reacted in a sort of was it the girl? I can't remember. Maybe it's best to sort of have a recap of this. There was some sort of split between these two people, and then some back and forth started going on about how games had been infiltrated by feminist, social justice kind of stuff. And they were like basically padding out the games with all these ideas, and that all the websites and all the forums that they go on have been overtaken with this stuff. I think it was 2014 that it happened. Let's just Google quickly. It's a while since I've read anything on this kind of stuff because it's years. Yeah, Zoe Quinn was the name of the woman who was involved in the controversy. I think it was just like the early days of internet madness, basically. And then a lot of these sorts of kids centered around places like 4chan started basically abusing the woman and various other people, like quite heavily, really, with all these sorts of memes and etc., which they saw as a sort of a war, basically, against the stuff that was infiltrating their beloved video games. And it was kind of like a crux point for the culture war stuff, because it sort of led to all these what would become the alt-right, inverted commas, figures, or the alt-Lite people like Milo Yiannopoulos and all the rest of them. I really wasn't plugged into stuff at the time. I was I was totally not wired into it all. So the stuff I've read on it since is like only in the last sort of 4 years. But yeah, this stuff the GamerGate stuff, I think, was the foundation point of what would become this 4chan alt-right / movement, right. Which later obviously had a massive influence on getting Trump in power.
I still don't really know what alt-Lite or alt-right really means, or alt-left. There's like different meanings all over the place.
Yeah, it's become one of these sort of branding terms to describe anything that's right wing now, or anything that's not like woke or whatever.
You also got the alt left now. Like what does that mean? Like and
I don't think these terms have any hard and fast definition, really. They're appropriated by different groups or different movements at any time, really.
That's dangerous, Like if a word can just be used in many different ways to describe people, then
look at the way the word fascist is used and has been used since fascism. Really, half the instances of the word fascist being used doesn't describe anything that's really fascist. Like fascism is a quite unique, weird, like mixture of like war economy ideas like that were born in the First World War, mixed with like a load of what you would describe as left-wing economic policies, which came from the socialist element, mixed with ultranationalism, mixed with this sort of mystical worship of the nation and the idea that the nation needs to be reborn. This is the key sort of fascist element, the idea that human beings who live as a sort of nation state must be reborn. So there's all these sort of paganistic kind of ideas like attached to it. So half the fascist like labels that you see like hurled around are just really in reference to like someone who's ultra nationalist or a movement that is pretty heavily right wing or that worship or that like looks up to the church and the state or whatever. Right. So fascism has become this just the phrase. Orwell talked about himself, like how the word, even in the late 40s, had just become to be used for anything that was even sort of slightly nationalistic in whatever way. And we're still with that now. So it's the same with like alt-right, this word. Like if you're going to talk about the alt-right, I think you're in reference to people who are like these sort of white nationalist types, the Richard Spencer, who claimed that he created that phrase, the alt-right. These sorts of people who want like an ethno-state, which would just be an impossibility for many different reasons.
Isn't that just like the same as like Nazi ideology, basically, or?
Pretty much, yeah. Like it's neo-Nazism, like the new sort of wave of it, really. But then the term like got like appropriated by others, so it like was being used by like Steve Bannon, who described all the sort of organs that surrounded Breitbart, the news channel, as alt-right. They were the alternative right that were sort of like going to battle with the elite conservative right wing, the Republican establishment, etc.
Right.
And so this term was basically like a sort of a satellite of anything that was opposed to the established conservative movement. So all the Tea Party people were like the first sort of wave of what he saw as the alt-right. Of course, in the popular press, like alt-right has now come to be, when you think of alt-right, you think of these white nationalist types or these 4chan race-obsessed types or whatever. Right. So, yeah, that's what the term... There was an article written by Milo Yiannopoulos on the Breitbart site, which went through all the different... what he saw as all the different wings of this alt-right movement at the time. I think it was like 2015 or I don't know, maybe later that when he wrote it. But yeah, then his obviously career imploded with his, I think it was like he mentioned something about kids or something and how kids should be able to choose to get into a relationship. I think he got dropped from his book or whatever, book deal or something.
Yeah.
I don't know when that was. Was it 2 or 3 years ago now or something? But yeah, he was quite instrumental in the rise of the popularization of all this sort of new right-wing stuff, like which is geared quite, I don't know, like nihilistically, like really. It was all like everything's kind of shit, and especially the left are shit, and so just throw shit at them.
He was just. I mostly saw him as just a troll, you know. Like he was just poking on social media and making fun, and you know, and he was like a gay Jewish guy, conservative, married to a black guy. He was, you know, he was the ultimate enigma, basically. I
think he'd been propelled quite a lot, really. Like he appeared on like some British talk show like years before. There's like this old clip of him, which and he's nothing like what he became, really. He's quite like reserved and quiet and whatnot, and he hasn't got any of the flamboyancy that he sort of adopted as his persona, etc. But yeah, the reactionary sort of wave happened. Like he was one of this reactionary wave to all the rise of the identitarian leftist politics that we now, I think, started to call wokeism, which is not just in relation to the race stuff, but I think that all of it really, like race, gender, sexuality. So, yeah, I think that movement has sort of died, or like really kind of been battered down in various ways. And like, yeah, there's the mainstream hegemony is really the sort of corporate woke politics, basically.
Yeah, but I don't think
really.
I don't think people are really buying it though, because all the movies that go woke, people aren't gonna see those.
Yeah.
Like the go woke, go broke thing seems to be pretty accurate, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's pumped out everywhere. It's got a lot of backing, hasn't it? And all these figures that have arisen and become like quite money spinning, very capitalistic, really. Ibram X. Kendi and these types of figures who like get, I don't know, you do a 45-minute speech and you get £20,000 or $20,000, whatever. Like it's ultra capitalist.
Who is this? Who is this person you're talking about?
He's the guy who wrote the How to Be an Anti-Racist book, which like blew up this year because of all the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah, anti-racism.
Yeah, this new sort of doctrine, like the idea that you can't be not racist, like you have to actively take a stand against racism. You have to be an anti-racist. It's like, I don't know, cult-like kind of ideas and whatnot. But in my view, a lot of
But that's the thing. It sounds lovely and logical. Like, hey, you know, I'm against racism. Like, I want to be an anti-racist too. But then you dig a little deeper, and it's this creepy, you know, cold-like kind of thing.
I think, yeah, a lot of it really like it. I mean, and there's so many questions that you ask with regards, like equity. They use the word equity. They love this word, consistently using it. What do you mean by equity? Bringing people up to a certain level. You have to set the standard by which you raise everyone up. And how are you going to measure? And how are you going to where are you bringing people up to? I don't know, that like to me, they never seem to have any sort of actual strategies for solving the problems that they've diagnosed. It all just seems to be, here's a bunch of structural problems that we've identified, and we all need to feel guilty about these problems that exist. It really reminds me of all the sort of religious kind of stuff that was going on the internet back in the day. Like it was like, here's a bunch of religious bigots, basically. Here's a bunch of idiots who still believe the world is 2,000 years old or 3,000 years old or whatever. Look at these ignorant fools, etc. Like, look what they've created. They've created homophobia. They've created sexism. They've created racism, etc. And yeah, like there was no proposal as to how to solve the problems that apparently are rife. I think the problems of racism and sexism, etc., are problems and have been gradually dissipating over the last few decades, and will continue to do so. And a lot of the anti-racist movement will no doubt take credibility that they're the ones bringing about the improvements. But I think these improvements were already happening before, like the emergence of these figures, and will continue to happen to the point that in about 10, 15, 20 years, talking about race or gender in the way that we talk about it today will just seem as weird as talking about like religion and atheism. Like seems a bit today now, a bit out of touch.
Right.
I think the new generation will rebel against all the millennial wokeism. It's Victorian obsessions. It's obsessions with not being able to say certain things or not being able to hold certain views, or you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a thisist or a thatphobe. And I think the backlash to it is coming. They'll reject it, or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll adopt it all and become ultra woke. But I think historically, the new generations always reject the generations' concepts and ideas before them and shrug it off. So they'll be, I don't know, altering the culture will alter again in about 10, 15 years, or switch or whatever. But until then, we've got to put up with these conversations being these central defining conversations, which are just tiring for everyone, really. I mean, that book written by the woman, I can't remember her name, Renee something, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, etc. It just screams.
That is racist. That's a racist thing to say.
I mean, yeah, like I haven't even read the book. I've read like a synopsis of it. I can't remember. It's some big book they were all reading this summer. Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Sorry, you can see my
No, but that statement in itself is racist. You know, that's like you're not talking to a group of people because of their skin color, I guess. Isn't that what we're?
Yeah, because they don't understand the historical dimensions and ramifications of racism, which I think is a falsehood, really. Like, I think, I don't know, I spent a lot of my younger years reading a lot of these histories of, racism and the struggles against, like, these movements that arose, whether it be from, I don't know, like the Gobenau sort of 19th century racists, all the way up to Nazi race science, etc. And then the struggles of Black people in America, which obviously, like the civil rights movement, and then even like the Black Panther movement, Huey P. Newton, and some of these figures that were like quite a threat to the American establishment in the sort of late 60s, 70s and onwards. And then the rise of hip hop, obviously, which I became very interested in and then studied quite intensely. So, yeah, I don't know. I think this, it is the sort of, there's a big plane going past or something, or
yeah, someone drives by on a scooter.
Yeah, it sounded like a hairdryer had just been put on. But yes, I don't know. Race, gender, these are the core issues of our day. But I think if history is anything to go by, these issues will dampen and sort of disappear, and it'll be weird to talk about these things in however many years.
Well,
and then we'll look back.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it creates more division. It creates more bitterness and resentment.
I think it makes those problems only worse, to be honest. You know.
Yeah, and there's many speakers who are like quite eloquent on, like that Coleman Hughes guy. I think he's like got, you know what I mean? I don't know, maybe I'm just biased towards people who are what they'd say centering reason or logic and white methods of looking at things, supposedly. But I think that's just, I don't know, that assumption is racist in itself.
Who are you talking about now?
A guy called Coleman Hughes. A lot of his videos are quite interesting. You should watch some of his videos, yeah.
He's an American writer.
Yeah, I think he was writing for, he's written for a few different publications and whatnot.
He's a really young guy.
Yeah, he's mid-20s, I think, or something like that. But he's become quite big in the last 2 years. Discussions like this always remind me that I've read certain things here and there, but then you don't fully take it all on board. Yeah, he is very young, actually, 24 years old. Right?
You can tell he's a very smart guy. If you look at his list of accomplishments and credentials at 24 years of age.
Yeah, I think his main arguments are against the sort of, the rise of what we call wokeism, the sort of intersectional interpretations of racism that exist in America. And I think it's just fair and even-handed and logical and reasonable with how he studies it and whatnot. He isn't liked by a lot of the wokest types on Twitter. I follow some of them here and there, and they're not impressed with him in any sort of way. They see him as apologizing for certain things or adopting the mainstream sort of petty bourgeois liberal outlook on stuff.
Okay.
But yeah.
He also has a podcast. There's many big guests, actually.
Yeah. Like I say, he got quite big, I think, over because he just wasn't parroting all the usual stuff that we hear about and whatnot. Yeah.
All right.
People have the tendency to be blinded by whatever is the big issue of the day, and the big issues of the day now are race, gender, etc. And so people get sucked into one or the other camps, and yeah, like it comes to define the entire perspective on how someone looks at the world. It comes to be the underlying thing that needs to be addressed. Yeah, it's very religious. It's very sort of religious in that regard. I always think that yeah, like it. I mean, it's almost like we've lost God. God dead, and people need to fill the void with this new project, this new striving, this new thing to suffer for, like I talk about in the song, really.
Right, which is a good segue into talking about the lyrics of the third verse. Let's dive into that, because I'd like to go through that, because I think that's a great part of that song. So,
well, about the lyrics, yeah,
let's.
We've covered a lot of the sort of the core concepts in the lyrics of the third verse, really, especially this stuff to do with propagating guilt, and yeah, as I said, the whole song was pretty much just a piecing together of the puzzle over a period of a year or whatever, and then the rhyme schemes were just slowly tweaked or built or altered. So yeah, a lot of the lines are quite like heavy with rhymes. So even just the first line in the third verse, at last, a creed of grievance was built, which is a reference to the sort of like the woke stuff, the grievance studies, sort of, or the idea that they are based all around grievances. At last, the creed of grievance was built, and his task was to breathe the feeling of guilt. Propagation of guilt is the core sort of driver behind it, in my view, and it's aided by the priest's desire to excommunicate and the pedant's desire to be the first to spot an error or a mistake. So if someone says something that is not quite correct politically, as they would say, then this person must atone and repent for the thing that they've said or done or whatever, or they get sacked or cancelled or axed or banned, or they ought to be boycotted, deplatformed, excluded, and they call it inclusion, etc. So yeah, like the rhymes really are working like last, task, creed, breed, grievance, feeling, built, guilt. The whole syllable, all the syllables in the line are rhyming. At last, a creed of grievance was built, and his task was to breed the feeling of guilt. To secure power, to make them feel filthy, the innocent must be made to feel guilty. To sing a political hymn to bitterness, repent for the original sin of privilege. Enthralled by the gospel's passion, this command was installed as a moral fashion. So this whole verse is like replete with like religious references or with religious words, original sin, a hymn, like the gospel, the idea of the good news being brought, the passion of the sufferings of people, and how these kind of religious sort of semi-religious ideas that we have inherited from Christianity still live on in us, the values that are very much Christian, and we're still animated by them, and all our political ideologies are sort of, in my view, like secularizations of Christianity, but with an emphasis on different things.
Right.
So, I mean, the conservative right-wing sort of ideas are individualistic, which is very much a Christian emphasis, the idea of the individual's relation to God and the way you communicate with God through prayer, supposedly. But then the left's egalitarianism, again, and their progressivism is very Christian, in the sense that you are progressing towards the kingdom of heaven, the end of days or whatever, in which some sort of utopian situation will happen, and that we're working towards the equality of souls before God. All these ideas like are Christian, and then like the tweaking of them over time. The Reformation is a sort of egalitarian, an attempt to introduce egalitarianism to allow the people access to scripture, so that they don't have to have it handed to them via the priests, and so that they can basically read themselves. And obviously things that were happening at the time made this possible, the printing press. So yeah, a lot of like these switches are driven by technology, and the new technology that arises. I think a lot of the turbulence we've seen in the last 10 years is the internet really restructuring the way politics functions and works.
Right.
We're still in that right now, I think. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think we're still figuring out how to deal with the whole social media thing. You know, I remember I kind of remember what the world was like before social media was a big deal, because, you know, I was a kid, so I don't have a full adult experience of the world back then, and I'm sure many things were less easy and less good than they are now because of the lack of internet and social media and stuff. But
yeah,
I don't know. It's on the one hand, it's great that you can send someone or reach someone anywhere in the world who you don't even know and agree on something or disagree on something. But I don't know, the whole mob forming thing that came along with it, I don't think is a good thing. And
I think it's unleashed. I think the mob mentality is always within us. I do think we are predisposed to obviously hunt out our own little pack, our tribe, our crowd. I don't know. It goes back to the hunter ethos, really. Like we function in packs, our friendship circle or family groups, etc. We go out on the hunt. Cancel culture is pretty much the same sort of thing online. The idea that you form this little pack, they go on the hunt for wrongdoers or some meat, and they engage in like a feeding frenzy in which they all pounce on a certain person for not adhering to a certain like moral value which they hold dear,
right,
but perhaps is held dear by everyone. And so this pylon occurs, and then it attracts a crowd, and then everyone just wants to be involved. Everyone just wants to like have something to say on the issue, and it happens in all quarters, really. It's not really only coming from the left, although the left has sort of really adopted it as their own method of attack. I think because they're the most plugged in to this online world, this sort of internet, Twitter mentality. So it seems to be coming from them the most. I mean, it comes from anything. You could pick up the newspapers back in, like, I don't know, the 70s or wherever, the 80s, and it'd be the same sort of thing, them haranguing some person and whatnot, and there'd be a massive sort of pylon in that regard, like, and someone would be cancelled for whatever. So, yeah, like social media has just amplified it, put it in front of all our faces, brought out a lot of these instincts that are inherent, and
it made it very easy to find a tribe, to find a group of people who agree with you, even like no matter how crazy your ideas are. There's
precisely. So you'll have a pylon coming from 3 continents. You know what I mean? There'll be people in Australia piling on, and then people in Europe, and then people in America, like on one person who's done something or whatever. And the whole world will be talking about one thing at one time. So,
well, did you see that, by the way, that Elon Musk tweeted something? He said something like...
Bitcoin or something.
No, it was... he said something like pronouns are... I forget what it was.
Pronouns suck. He said, didn't he? Yeah. Something
like that, yeah. And then now he... some like anti-hate group wants him to apologize, and I don't know if that happened yet, but let's see if I can find a tweet. But
it happened a while ago. I think he posted that, and then it caused a massive pronouns. It's amazing. Again, you go on Twitter right now, and Eddie Izzard has declared his pronouns, her pronouns, supposedly. It's just nonsense. Like, within 5 minutes, every article or every Wikipedia page, even in reference to the person, has changed its pronouns. Memory hold all remembrance of that person as, well, the reality that they are. But there is a lyric, obviously, in this third verse, the deranged worship of the pronoun. A strange circus did invoke now the deranged worship of the pronoun.
Yeah, let's see. This command was instilled as a moral fashion, and as these flagellants ravaged their health, the priesthood began to anchor itself.
Yeah, this command was installed as a moral fashion, and as these flagellants ravaged their health, another a reference to the flagellant movement in the sort of, I think it was the 14th century, where the movement, I think mainly it was, well, across Europe.
It's people who like whip themselves, right?
Yeah, they go out in public and sort of, they wanted to simulate Christ's suffering. So they would flagellate themselves, if that's the right word. It's sort of the same thing, really. A lot with this, with like the rise of social media, and then all these kids that are bombarded with these images, and they're comparing themselves on like an hourly basis, a minutely basis to like people all over the world, and seeing themselves in a negative way, in a sense, or that they don't match up or whatever. It's really amplified this playground. This playground mentality now is basically contained across the entire internet for all these kids that basically just spend their entire lives scrolling through TikTok videos or Instagram or wherever, and obviously develop sort of neurotic reactions to it all, and then kind of they're addicted to the dopamine hits that they get from just posting one little picture of themselves, and but then of course the hate pours in, or like unfavorable comments, and they haven't sort of built up a way to like be resilient towards this sort of stuff. And they're subjected to all sorts of stuff like porn at a too young age, like an ultra young ages, and the internet has sort of given rise to, I don't know, a lot of the neurotic developments that are now being promoted and aided and abetted by many in the mainstream press under the pretext of kindness and compassion, etc.
Right.
All the gender infatuations that have only been around for the last like 10 years. Massive waves of young girls identifying as trans or non-binary, etc. and then the clapping and the cheering and the celebrating of this by the mainstream press and all outlets. I don't know. I don't see it ending in any sort of positive way. Like, I see it as a bunch of kids, impressionable youngsters who adopt an ideology on the internet, bury themselves in Tumblr videos and YouTube stuff, and then internalize this doctrine that says that they'll commit suicide if they don't transition.
Right.
So they get on testosterone, etc. They start altering their body to resemble that of a man's. And yeah, that like this has grown massively, and we're told that it's because it's become more acceptable socio-culturally, that the reason why we're seeing this huge rise. If that's the case, why aren't, if being trans has become so like acceptable, how come we're not seeing a huge rise amongst middle-aged women? We're seeing huge rises amongst young girls.
That's a good point.
And like, surely if it was more culturally acceptable, we would be seeing a rise of all ages, of all those who are trans, of all those who are supposedly inflicted with this sense of like what either gender non-conformity or whatever neurosis that gives rise to it, which has like very little evidence to back it at present. They don't know what it is, so they basically created these stopgaps, these words like gender dysphoria, to describe things they don't have really any evidence pointing towards. It's based on first-hand descriptions. I could go to the doctors, describe all the features of it, and probably get myself prescribed estradiol valerate or whatever estrogen compound within a few months. Like, and then, you know what I mean? I don't know. There's a lack of oversight on all this stuff, and all the schools have adopted it all. Everyone's rushing to show their compassion surrounding this issue. I don't know. I suspect it's going to have some sort of fallout in the next 10, 15 years. All these kids who've sort of aligned themselves with it, who then realize that, yeah, they were part of a sort of online cult, really,
right.
a push towards it.
Man,
perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps they all are trans, but there's too many questions surrounding. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. When I was a kid, all we cared about was Nintendo versus Sega. You know, it just seemed a little more innocent, I guess. You know, like this is like life-changing shit, and they want to.
Yeah.
They're talking about letting kids decide. I think I read some story. I think it was probably in the States. Pretty sure it was in the States. There was some 12-year-old kid who is a girl who wants to be a boy, or the other way around. I don't know. And I think his or her parents refused that, and then I think the parents got arrested or got in trouble by Child Protective Services because they denied their kid to take this life-altering hormone blockers or hormones or something. And I was like, wow. I mean, is that really what we want? You know? And yeah. I'm sorry, you were saying something about Biden. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like there was. I mean, just before the election, that like Biden was questioned by some woman who has a trans child and whatnot, and she wanted assertion that he was going to allow the use of these drugs and whatnot, which have like pretty much zero evidence, long-term evidence of their effects. And whatever evidence exists suggests it really does actually damage bone density, and also like spatial memory, how the person sort of, how the memory works in general. These puberty blocking drugs, which generally are used off-label, and they were for things like male prostate cancer or for chemically castrating like pedophiles.
Oh my God.
Now we give these drugs to children who are, you know what I mean, like having some sort of neurotic and anxious breakdown, in relation to what they think is gender dysphoria. This word has become, in the same sense, the young girls back when I was a kid were obsessed over anorexia or bulimia. And now the new replacement is dysphoria. This new term, which was only sort of instituted in 2013, they used to call it gender identity disorder. But of course, like, they didn't want it called a disorder because they didn't want it suggested that there's anything wrong with it. So it's become this cult fashion, which has proliferated on Tumblr and Reddit and other places, tons of places. It's mixed with, it's certainly mixed with the rise in internet culture in general. And yeah, like tens of thousands of kids now believe that they can alter their biological functions, or that they are, you know what I mean, a different gender. So, and yeah, there's so much, I don't know, so much confusion and so much doublethink on this issue. It's an absolute maze, the gender issue itself. And the supposedly kind and compassionate people we always hear celebrating it, like when Eddie Izzard today comes out with pronouns, or like a couple of weeks ago, Ellen Page decides that she is going to use he, they pronouns, etc. And there's just like millions and millions of shares, like unfathomable amounts. And at the same time, they're saying the people who are trans are oppressed in some way. No, this stuff has been rising over the last 10 years, especially, like, and it's had massive injections of cash from like massive funding from private equity firms. Things like Arcus Foundation pumped 20 million into transgender activism back in 2015. Since then, there's been loads of others as well.
What
This
do
is
they
a
get out
massive
of it,
industry.
though? What do they get out of it?
What do they get out of it? The sort of ego stroking of supporting great causes, or, like, you know what I mean, bringing about equality, etc. These leveling projects. So
Right.
it's like any charity. What do people get out of charity? Ultimately, they're giving away money. So ultimately, they're doing it like for the self-interest of feeling good about themselves, that they're helping like people who need that help in whatever way. So it's like anything of that regard. Why do people in general give away money? Right. Ultimately, because it will help them in some way, whether it be helping their sense of self, or giving them a sense that they are participating fruitfully in society and aiding some good causes, or what they perceive to be good causes. So yeah, but yeah, the trans issue has gone mad over the last, especially over the last 5 years. I think it's become quite busy with power. It's gained a lot of political converts, from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris to all these celebrities. Obviously, Caitlyn Jenner. You've got like the Wachowski sisters, the directors of The Matrix, who obviously were the Wachowski brothers, but now are the Wachowski sisters. So they both transitioned. You have like models such as Monroe Bergdorf. You have a plethora of journalists, pretty much all the mainstream petty bourgeois type journalists are all on board with it, and howling about how people are oppressed, etc. You have numerous politicians all over the place coming out in complete support for it. And there's a complete lack of oversight. Just last week, there was a big court case in High Court in England, down in London. And it was on the use of puberty blockers. And it was about can a child consent to, does a child understand the ramifications of taking what are really experimental drugs, which have no evidence of the long-term effects, very little evidence whatsoever of how it affects someone neurologically in the long term. Can they consent to, do they understand are they able to give consent, basically? And the High Court, like, obviously uses what's called the Gillick competency method, which like I don't know it fully, but it determines whether a child understands all the issues surrounding the thing that they are supposedly consenting to. And they battened it down. They said, like, it's very unlikely that a child who is 15 or 14, 16 even, understands the effects, the long-term effects of what these drugs will eventually lead to, because the puberty blockers are just the first step. They suppress puberty, and then most of the people who go onto puberty blockers will end up on cross-sex hormones. So they'll be pumped with the opposite sexes, like, and it's it's always some synthetic compound. And then, of course, some will then go on to have these surgeries that basically just, they don't do it. You don't transition into anything. It's an impossibility to actually transition. You don't become the opposite sex. You just modify certain aspects of your body to meet an image of yourself that you have at a certain time, which they say only 1% of people regret these procedures. All these studies that show regret rates are done like a year or two after. They never do a study whatsoever that shows 20 years after, are these people happy with the procedures that they underwent 20 years ago? I think it would be very different if they did that. So, yeah, the media has jumped on board this issue. That's why it's everywhere. On Twitter every day, it's talked about by all major figures, cultural commentators and whatnot. That's why the sort of war between the feminists and the trans activists has been magnifying and amplifying in the recent years.
Right.
So, yeah.
And then
sorry, I could go on for days about this issue, but
but you're saying a lot of interesting stuff. That's why I'm not interrupting you. And your way of making an argument against it is to make rap songs about it.
Pretty much, I'll write up. I'll write up what I think about an issue in prose and then convert it into lyrics generally. This song has a few references to, obviously it's not about the trans issue, but the trans issue is part of it all. It's tied into the whole gender infatuation that we talk about.
Yeah, you made another song with that as a subject about identifying as a bat. I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, that was the first one we put out just because, so like there was a famous paper written back in the late 70s, Thomas Nagel, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And it's about consciousness. I think I mentioned it last time, or maybe I did. I don't know who I've mentioned these things to half the time. So yeah, like the song is me trying to simplify the arguments like about that are present, like in the whole trans discourse, supposedly, if we call it that, and just simplify them into the core basic facts. A man cannot become a woman any more than a man can become a bat. People will say that's a false equivalence. It is a false equivalence, but man and woman themselves are a false equivalence. The idea that a man can become a woman is itself false equivalence. That's the whole point. A lot of the activists call this the one joke.
The one joke?
They say that, yeah. So, I mean, it's been around for years. This, I self-identify as a book, or I self-identify as an attack helicopter, or I self-identify as this, or blah, blah, blah. They call it the one joke.
Okay.
It is one joke, and it's one joke is generally all that's needed because you're already, you know what I mean? All it does is amplify the magnitude of the false equivalence,
right?
Which this is what pisses all the feminists off now, like, or the new wave of sort of feminists that have been sort of brought back to feminism as a result of the rise in this issue and the amount of media attention it has gotten over the last, however long, which hasn't come from the right wing. It's mainly come from the centrist papers that have sort of pushed this as the next great civil rights struggle, trans rights. But it's built on falsehoods. Like the Gender Recognition Act in the UK has been in since 2004, which basically provides for any adult who's consents and would want to go through the process of modifying their body to make themselves feel better about themselves in whatever way. There is no illegality. They consistently compare it to gay rights and the struggles that gay people faced in trying to attain. Well, gay people started from a position of literal illegality. That's not the same with trans. It's not illegal. There is no trans equivalent of Section 28. There never has been.
What is Section 28?
It was the law that basically made homosexual acts illegal in Britain.
Okay.
If you Google it right now. Clause 28, the Local Government Act, right there. A local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting sexuality or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. So, yeah. But, again, that's a false equivalence in itself. Like the idea that trans rights and gay rights are tantamount. They're not.
What a lot of these folks also say is, well, gender and sex are two different things. That's an argument that's made that I see a lot.
Yeah, so the idea of biological sex is that which you are programmed as a result of your chromosomes and whatnot.
Right.
Whereas gender are all the meanings and ideas and concepts that are supposedly imposed upon the human being, like all the ideas of related to how a man or how a woman is supposed to act, their masculinity. Like you're a man, so you've got short hair.
Shorter than I want, by the way. I'm losing it, man.
These ideas that are purportedly born of the environment that we're in.
Right.
So that's what they mean by gender. But even then, the term gender has been sort of obfuscated in the last 5 years, and obviously has come to refer primarily to identity,
right.
and how you build yourself as an image in your own mind, and then how the external world tries to make you fit a certain mold, and how you feel off kilter with it, how you feel like you don't fit in. And so a lot of the feminists will decry gender. They don't like all these imposed categories. They don't say women should have to wear this or that or whatever, or etc. And these meanings are imposed from the external world, and now a generation of young kids are believing that they're not a boy or not a girl because they don't like certain things. So if they're a boy who likes playing with Barbie dolls or something, that must mean that they're actually a girl. They're born in the wrong body, supposedly. The trans types were using this phrase for years, which they've stopped using in the last few months. The whole trans debate is literally, it's bogged down in so much crazy complexity now. Many people are fed a very simplified, happy, compassionate. We're putting pronouns in our bio and pronouns in our email signatures, etc. They're fed a very simplified version of what's going on, and I don't think they understand the medical ramifications, the history behind this. Its rise, it's just come from nowhere in the last 10 years, especially. 10 years, no one was talking about this kind of stuff.
No.
Transgenderism existed. Transsexualism has existed for decades, but it wasn't a pivotal cultural issue. It wasn't around in any of the same way. It's risen off the back of the rise of all these identity issues. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I could go on days about this issue.
But it's an interesting topic, and you know, it's a very relevant topic. And you think the next thing is going to happen? It's going to get like even more far out, and then at one point it's going to implode in itself, or?
I think it's already starting, to be quite frank. I see there's a rise of detransitioners, which they are frantically trying to downplay. These young, mainly girls who thought they were boys due to whatever these these imposed meanings, supposedly. And they sought to transform themselves into men, into boys through testosterone injections, etc. Through mastectomy, the removal of the breasts. Some of them even went further and had oophorectomies, whereby they removed their ovaries, they removed their womb through a hysterectomy. They have skin extracted from the forearm, their arm, and then that's used to carve a makeshift neo-phallus, which obviously is limp, and it doesn't function in any way like a real penis, just as the neo-vagina, or the opposite, doesn't function in any way like an actual vagina. So a lot of young girls have gone through these procedures, or some of them, and regret it. I have come to the realization. The case I mentioned a minute ago was revolving around a young girl who got put on puberty blockers, went onto the cross-sex hormones, had a mastectomy by the age of 20, which meant she'd had her breasts removed, and her voice had changed. She speaks a bit like a boy. Her face padded out in certain ways and whatnot. And then she came to the realization that perhaps she'd made some sort of error, and wanted to reverse the transition. And these are what's known as the detransitioners. So there's a lot of ethical questions surrounding this issue, which the activists are actively trying to have thrust to the side, or have people cast as bigots for questioning these sorts of things. And it's also why some big names such as J.K. Rowling or whatever felt the need to speak out last year.
She went from being part of the whole woke group to being a villain for that group, right?
Yeah. Well, because of this issue, yeah. And I think she was on the sort of feminist wing of stuff, the liberal feminist type kind of thing. But she followed I think she was following certain people for a while who are pretty big in the feminist movement. And this issue has become sort of like a lightning rod, or however you describe it. It has attracted various peoples from all over the spectrum back to feminism, and it's centered, like, a lot of them older women who have been shocked a bit by what's happening now in quite large numbers. We're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of kids over like a few years, and that's just in the UK. Like, you look at American figures, it's even bigger. And the same is happening in Europe as well, and various other places. And the suspicion that obviously the internet is driving a lot of these people to believe that they are not the sex that they were born as, and that they have, that they are, right, and that they cannot change in any way. No amount of surgery will alter your sex in any way. Who are now modifying their bodies under the pretext that they can actually become the opposite sex, or can at least imitate it to some extent. So yeah, the issue poses so many ethical conundrums. That's why I'm mostly interested in it as well, like because it's. I mean, like I have a personal like connection to the issue, which I will talk about in future. But like yeah, so like I know someone who went through these procedures, is what I mean. Which I'll speak quite frankly about at some point. But yeah, the issue has become like this massive, it's what blew up half these figures as well. Like Jordan Peterson came to prominence as a result of like rebelling against the pronoun diktat that was handed down by his university or wherever it was, or the Canadian government, Bill C-16, I think it was it?
Yeah, I think in Canada they wanted to mandate speech, and he objected to that because I think it's the first time in either like British common law or Western country where a government mandates speech. And
yeah,
I'm not 100% sure if I get that right, but I think I am. And he objected to that on principle because it opens the door to mandated speech in general, which is dangerous, which I completely agree with. And
yeah, it would have made it a punishable offence to not refer to someone using the pronouns that related to their gender identity.
Yeah, and then people were saying, well, why don't you just be nice, man? Why don't you just call people what they want? And then he said, well, that's not the point. Like, this opens the door to mandated speech, which can only lead to bad things. And you know, once that door is open, it can and will be abused in the future.
Yeah, it will be abused, and the activists are quite like they are abusive in that regard, and they do actively try to make people comply with their wishes, and they have a lot of celebrity backers. This idea that they have few vocal media allies is absolute codswallop. So yeah, I've already listed off a bunch of names earlier, but like, I mean, you could go on for days. Yeah, like I think that was it was around 2016, wasn't it, that he got, or 2017, I'm not sure, that he sort of got big as a result of that issue. Yeah, there have been like sort of explosions over the years here and there. It's really risen to mainstream prominence in the last sort of, especially the last 3 years. Yeah. Yeah, it's a minefield, the entire debate is, but nonetheless, I don't know. I feel the need to talk about it. Talk about it frankly.
One of the bigger moments also, I think, was the Chapelle special that came out. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. The Sticks and Stones ones. He had a you know, he also made segment. Yeah, he made jokes about it, and you know, he was very vilified. And I was like, oh, you know, when the biggest, arguably the best comedian of our era, is making jokes about this, maybe this will mark the start of the end of this whole thing, or at least open the door to people who criticize it with legitimate points, you know? Like,
yeah,
I don't like the idea that something cannot be discussed, you know?
Same, yeah. No, I think anything is up for discussion. There are certain topics that need to be handled with care,
for sure.
Of course, I do think. And there are many topics that need to be handled with sort of, reason. But ultimately, anything is to be discussed, even the most horrendous kind of stuff you could imagine. But yeah, like on the trans issue, I think there's a lot of there's just obviously a lot of clamping down upon speech. There's a lot of cancellation. How many women now have been sacked for like not abiding by its doctrinal assertions and whatnot? And yeah, like the issue is going to continue for a while now. I think there will be a turning of the tide at some point. And a lot of the people who have allied themselves with this, what they believe to be the next great rights struggle, or whatever they deem it as, will realize that they've allied themselves with something that probably actually requires some questioning and some like ethical oversight, which is lacking amongst many in the mainstream. So, right. Yeah.
Do you have any other place other than YouTube or Twitter where you put your stuff? Because I'm pretty sure if the video blows up, I'm sure it violates all kinds of rules, you know?
This is another thing the activists try to make out, that the people questioning this movement are animated by hate. It's the complete opposite. We're animated by primarily a worry that children are removing parts of their body as a mistake. That's ultimately what it boils down to. And a lot of the feminists are concerned with the encroachment of trans rights onto like female rights, etc.
Well, the thing that really bothers me also is the whole sports thing, like letting men participate in female sport. You know, there's this infamous story of this MMA fighter who's a biological guy.
Fox.
I'm sorry?
Fallon Fox.
Yeah, he was not a very high ranking or very good MMA fighter per se. And he went into the cage with these women who were MMA fighters for a very long time and who were very good. And he beat the absolute shit out of them because he was just way stronger. And, you know, because he had been on, he's a guy, you know?
Yeah.
I think he fractured someone's skull. And one of the women he fought said something like, "Yeah, I've been a professional fighter forever. I've never been punched like that in my life. I never knew I could get punched that viciously and that hard, you know." And
it's happening. It's happening in multiple places. I think in two Maoriga in the weightlifting championships in the Pacific Games. It's some games off in Oceania somewhere. Won the weightlifting. A man won the weightlifting championships there. There's quite a famous image. There's tons of instances. I can't remember the name of the cyclist who has won out, and more across sports in general. Really, it's happening like across the board. The arguments. There's a good site you should check out. It's called boysversuswomen.com. It's quite enlightening.
Let's see, boys versus women, male high school athletes versus female Olympians.
So it gives a thing here. Events common to both competitions. This isn't all like Olympic events. So these are tests of strength, tests of speed, basically tests of athletic prowess, physical ability. All the people being measured here are the 2016 high school boys MBNO. So the best boys, the best young boys in America versus Olympic level, the elitist females that one could possibly imagine. This is there's all these little videos here. So 100 meters, all the boys win it. And it'll even say how old they were in some of them. So some of the boys are like 14, 15.
Wow, the 800 meters, it's crazy how much difference there is.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you point that out, you know, that's seen as some kind of a value judgment or something, but it's not. It's
not. It's like comparing a cheetah with a greyhound. You know what I mean? They're both quick, but the cheetah is going to win out.
Right.
Like that's probably a bad false equivalence, but nonetheless.
Your point still stands.
You see what I mean, though. Like it's not there's no denying that Olympic level female athletes are insanely impressive. You know
sure.
What I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
but the boys have a biological advantage in every regard, apart from when it comes to the more long distance running. So if you look at the 5,000 meters, the women win that. Again, that's because of I think like the way a woman's lungs are oxygenated, it like hands itself well to long distance running more so than it does for men.
Interesting.
Don't quote me on that, but there are quite a lot of these biological differences that, for instance, allow a woman to swim farther and longer than a man. Men are built for rapid combat, fighting, hunting, etc., sprinting. Their bodies are geared for these kind of things, and they've evolved for specific purposes over hundreds of thousands of years. So, yeah. I think Emma Hilton is one of the women who like is quite an expert on these kind of things and whatnot. I don't know who puts together this site, but it's quite. It demonstrates just, and it's not merely in one field either. It's in all athletic fields that test strength, such as shot put, how far you can throw something. It even has some. The boys swept the top positions despite having heavier shots than the Olympic women. So the boys could throw a heavier shot put further than the greatest women in America.
Right. It's you know, even without all this data, it's so weird to me that, you know, this is a very controversial subject actually, because it's so obvious, you know.
Yeah. That's my position on it as well. That it has become a point of contention in mainstream discussion is more a reflection of, I don't know, how badly some people are educated or how willing they are to deny reality in pursuit of an ideology or a doctrine that they've adopted only recently. So this is the sports aspect is only one aspect, obviously, as well. Like the issue is sort of labyrinthine in its implications on so many different levels, from obviously the medical related stuff, which we talked about a bit, to the sports stuff, to just to how society functions in various ways, and how, like, what was it, a couple of days ago they were talking about deleting biological sex from birth certificates in general, something like.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's creepy, man.
So I think there's a woman who's writing a book about it all at the moment. Her name is Helen Joyce. She worked at The Economist, the liberal newspaper magazine. So she's writing on it all. And there's quite a lot of information here, there, and everywhere. I've been plugged into this debate for years now, quite a while, and I've seen how it's altered over the years, along with all the other stuff as well. But
hey man, well, we've been talking again for almost 3 hours. It's
yeah. Do you want to? And we didn't actually go through the lyrics, did we? But
no, we didn't. But let's just look at the last verse of this song and kind of close out with that, and then I have maybe one or two more shorter questions, and then we can wrap this up.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Let's pull up the last verse of the song.
So where did we get up to? Yeah, like the priesthood has arisen, this new priesthood from out of the universities and etc. And yeah, a rabble of activism with labour. It uses quite strong language here and there, but I think the strong language lends itself to rap quite a bit. For a catechism that casts suspicion on nature.
Well, I mean, you don't drop any F-bombs in there, so in that way, it's and you're not rapping about shooting other people or something. So, you know, compared to a lot of rap, it's not that bad, I'd say.
Well, that's what I thought as well. But obviously, this is considered a bit more controversial than someone talking about, I don't know, selling drugs or shooting someone or something.
And bitches and hoes and shooting motherfuckers.
Yeah. So But yeah, I think most of what we talked about, to be fair, is a reflection of the things I talk about in this verse, really. The rise of this sort of religious like cult, this rabble of activism which supports it. Then the masses were tongue-tied now by a vulpine vow to turn the world upside down. So to turn the world upside down, or to alter definitions and to invert the values that we hold. So the idea of man and woman, a man can be a woman, this new concept really, which would be alien to many in the past. And I don't think we've moved to some new level of intellectual greatness. This is just an ideology that has gained power and credence amongst certain people. And then all the things that have been talked about quite to death, really, but like victimhood became virtue, strength and integrity were made odious. So we're encouraging young kids sometimes to, I don't know, wallow in despair, which I've always been, I don't know, against. I worked with a lot of kids who were from tough backgrounds and, suffered with various issues. A lot of the talk regarding mental health, I don't see it helping, especially for young boys. But I guess a whole nother discussion that I could get into for, I don't know, a long time. What Nietzsche talked about with regards to the inversion of values. The Christians of the early Roman Empire basically turned all the things that they hated, all the things that they wanted but didn't have, they turned into the embodiment of evil. So they wanted power, they wanted riches, they wanted wealth or whatever. They wanted freedom from the sort of slave condition that they felt themselves to be in. And so anyone who was powerful, successful or strong, etc., was condemned as evil in the early Christian ideology. Or at least that's how Nietzsche.
That's what you see now with like masculinity is bad.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a similar sort of phenomenon, I think, really. And like, it's always been around. Like, you go even to like the manifesto written by the Unabomber in, I think this was 1995. It was written. Have you read or heard of that or not?
I know of it, but I haven't read into his stuff.
So it's very well written, actually, in spite of his terrorist acts and whatnot. The piece is it's very interesting.
A lot of these crazy people are usually not dumb people, which makes him even scarier, you know.
He was a mathematics kind of wizard as well. Like in his early years, he was at Harvard. He was younger than a lot of the people that were there. But then he obviously became alienated with what he called the industrial system, which he basically meant capitalism, as like this huge technological behemoth, which was just destroying the environment and the world, etc. He has in the text like an analysis of sort of what he called leftism, but is kind of like the sort of the seeds of what we see now with all the woke stuff, the obsession with race, gender, sexuality, etc. But he has a very good psychological analysis of basically it comes from their feelings of insecurity, instability, their need to align themselves with a movement, a group, or have something to rally around, have some sort of, I don't know, flag, if you can call it that, some idea, which they take up, the march for social justice, the struggle against racism, etc. And yeah, this becomes like an organizing principle. So yeah, I forget why I go on to this now. But
we were talking about vilification of things that are, like turning things upside down and vilifying.
Oh, right, yeah. So in order to make oneself feel better about oneself, you turn that which you feel to have done you wrong into the embodiment of evil in some way, and transform it into a hate subject or a hate figure in a sense. This is what Nietzsche called, I'm probably going to pronounce it terribly, but ressentiment or ressentiment, which was is the French word for like resentment, but it has a different meaning. Yeah, this feeling of being inadequate in comparison to those around you, and then you building a narrative for yourself which justifies your own inadequacy. And it stops people from rising above their problem, addressing their issues or whatever those issues are. Sometimes these issues are just imagined, and prevents them from being able to confront the problems which they face in life, whatever it may be, like mental health issues or physical issues or etc. And they instead turn to hating something which is easy to attack in whatever way.
Right.
So a lot of the, and it's a phenomenon that exists on both left and right, and it's not like it's not purely a left wing kind of idea. You see the same thing from.
It's more like a weak thing, I think. It's like a psychological trait, which
I've felt it myself sometimes, like when you're at a bad station in life, and you look and you're kind of jealous, you're envious of how, like, even sometimes with the music, I get a little kick of it. Like, how have these crap rappers got 3 million views? How have these people who can't even rhyme, do you know what I mean, something very simple, how have they got that amount of views, etc.? And so one is liable to hate the person who has got that or to reject it in some way. You see the same phenomenon with people hating millionaires or multimillionaires, especially billionaires, etc.
Yeah.
And like hating anything that seems powerful or strong or successful in some way.
Yeah, I never got that, like when I see someone in a strong position of who has a lot of money or who's driving a really nice car, my first thought generally is, oh, good for that guy. And my second thought is, how can I learn from this person? What can I do to move myself a little closer to that, And then there's and the easier thought is, the guy has so much money, fuck that guy. He must have done something bad to get that. Like the zero-sum game philosophy. Like you can only get something if you steal it in some kind of nefarious way from someone else.
I think, the writer Balzac said, like, behind every great fortune lies a great crime, supposedly.
Yeah.
And then Warren Buffett rebuked that and said that there is no crime behind his own, like Berkshire Hathaway's investing company. It's a phenomenon that has existed, I think, like a psychological trait that has existed it's in the human condition in a sense. It's really tied to the idea of envy, wanting that which you don't have and resenting the people who have that which you desire,
right?
And then turning them into some sort of enemy. I do think a lot of the woke stuff is driven by it, but
yeah, there's a lot of envy and resentment and the refusal to look at their own problems, I would say.
Yeah, or the refusal to address the root causes of some of these issues. Within themselves, really. We hear all this stuff about mindfulness and whatever, meditation daily. It's bombarded at people, but I don't know, a lot of the people don't really undertake any examination of their own psychology, in a sense. And it has to be a sort of ongoing process, really. You have to check of yourself on a frequent daily basis sometimes, not get bogged down in over obsessing or over analyzing things, which someone like I'm quite liable to do that on quite often, to be fair. I overanalyze like things I've said or done, etc. But sometimes you just have to, I don't know, move with it in a sense.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's a hard thing to do, and I think that's why a lot of people don't want to do it, or rather, rather claim that they're a victim of something instead of maybe looking in the mirror and saying, maybe I'm personally doing something that I could or should be doing differently. And coming to that conclusion is very tough and not fun at all.
It ultimately serves as an impediment for the person themselves, in my view. A lot of criticisms would come in saying that I'm individualizing people too much, and that the structural problems are more to blame, etc. And this obsession with systemic injustices. These play a part, no doubt, and the fabric of the environment that you live and function in is going to affect you.
Sure. Sure, there's gonna. I mean, there's truth to that too. Like, not everyone has the same starting point. That's definitely true. But I don't believe that it behooves anyone to make their starting point, especially if it's not a great starting point for whatever reason, to make that their entire identity. Like everyone.
I agree.
I mean, there's plenty of people. There's plenty of examples of people who started out in terrible positions who fought their way out of it and succeeded. Beyond the level of people who started in way better positions than they did. So there's, I do believe that if a person is willing to try hard enough, they can have a shot at it. And it's not a guarantee, but I think giving it a serious try is your best bet ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. I think I see the sort of I see the rise into my own sort of life, really, and I think the reason why I'm quite connected to that issue of resentment and what Nietzsche diagnosed as the psychological traits of certain people and whatnot is because I've seen it reflected in myself many times. I've often felt the same sort of things towards people. My mother died when I was 11, and I watched her die, and then I grew up in care, etc. And my father was never around, and various other things happened throughout my sort of childhood and teen years, and obviously you develop a sort of, I don't know, an abnormal psychology as a result of these things, and you don't fit in with certain other people, or at least I never really did. Which I mean, sometimes you're bothered about, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes I'm quite, I don't know, I'm quite like satisfied with largely like being a bit different to many of these people. But sometimes that train of thought can go down a very negative path, a destructive path, which leads to drug abuse and alcoholism and whatnot that many get onto, and some don't recover, or some turn to suicide, or think that suicide is the consolation, or self-harm, etc., or changing their gender, etc. I do think it has the roots in these sorts of like what the left always called trauma, but they never actually seem to get to the roots of their so-called trauma when they talk about it all the time. And yeah, like a lot of it's to do with destructive psychological frameworks, patterns, maps that don't function in the correct way, or don't lead the person out of the maze. They basically just keep them trapped, going around in a circle, either resenting some figure, some object of hate, whether it be the government, the state, the evil billionaires, the whatever, etc., whoever their enemy are this week. It prevents them from basically transforming their own situation. This is my concept of how it works, and I've seen it work with my own sort of life, really. It might not be applicable to everyone, and I acknowledge that. But nonetheless, I do think ultimately it's a mixture of the individual and the environment, the social situation.
For sure. I agree with that. Yeah. Oh, man.
And anyway, yeah, sorry, I'm just ranting on.
I think I understand a lot better where you're coming from with all this, doing this, now. I mean, like we talked for like 6 hours now, like a very intense one-on-one conversation. Like how many times do you do that with anyone, really? So so that's given me some insight into where you're coming from, even though I obviously don't know your whole story. And you mentioned earlier that the whole trans thing is kind of a personal thing for you too, because you know someone in your personal life who also deals with that, and it's a unique perspective that you have, and I think the music that you create from that, I'm very impressed by it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's hard to like communicate sometimes. I think I posted on a few forums, and they instantly just think that I'm coming from a right-wing conservative standpoint when I talk about these issues. I don't think that's the case, really. I think with the songs are just an attempt to analyze the psychology of certain types of people, or to look at an argument and try and boil it down to its core elements. That's sort of my object, really. But
in the previous podcast, you mentioned that you wanted to put an album out with 10 songs. And do you have all the subjects already lined up, or?
Yeah. So I'm willing to take any recommendations. Actually, I've got. Wait, let me just put it here. Like we've got. I'm working quite. I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to finish these blooming songs. Wait there. Let me just. I'm in the wrong Google Drive. I need to go on our joint one. Sorry, 2 seconds.
Make sure you got all that stuff also backed up somewhere outside of the Google Cloud.
I've actually thought about that. Yeah, like I don't want my account to suddenly get axed or whatever.
That stuff has happened.
So yeah, like I think the next song it was going to be about censorship, like the internet, the things we talked a bit about today, really, like the drive to cancel, the sort of hunting mentality that the internet has given rise to. That's the one I'm trying to finish at the moment. It's got quite a big, dancey sort of beat. It'll either be called something like Wrong Think or Thought Crime, some reference to Orwell. Right. I'm not quite sure. I haven't got the chorus fully down yet. It might be called 2 + 2 = 4. I'm trying to get the chorus perfect, like decent.
Right.
We'll see. It'll be out January probably, if not February. So we said monthly we'll release one song, or at least one video, and then maybe supplementary kind of videos, like I don't know, talking about the issues, etc. But a lot of the things we talked about today are probably the broad pool of things that I'll be addressing. Cool. So I will return to the trans issue, but I don't want to return to it too soon. Right. Talk about the non-binary stuff, pronouns, etc. A bunch of other stuff. I wanted to do like a problematic version, but for the other side, the right-wing sort of 4chan side.
That's good. That's smart. That's and that's an equally big thing to make a rap about too, I would say.
Yeah, they probably hate it, or maybe I don't know, but just look at the sort of the elements of despair and nihilism that sort of drove them into this sort of little online bubble, which ended in Pepe memes and Trumpism, etc. I do want to address all the fixations on race a bit deeper, talking about privilege and some of the arguments that exist in some of these, what's been going on for the last year with the protests and stuff. I want to address issues surrounding mental health that we just talked about a minute ago. And then like a philosophical history of wokeism. So where I see it sort of originating from, like starting with sort of Nietzsche, and then it gets picked up by Foucault and Derrida, who are massively inspired by Nietzsche. And then it sort of branches out to the things James Lindsay talks about, like critical social justice, fields, post-colonialism, race, gender, etc., all these different disciplines. And then political extremism, left-wing, right-wing, Islamism will be another topic, I think.
All right.
So, yeah,
Well,
anyway, sorry.
I'm looking forward to those songs, man. It's going to be one heck of an album when it's done, I'm sure. And
Hopefully, yeah.
And the beats are good, and the production value of the videos are great too. I don't know, do you make those yourself as well? Or
Yeah, I do all the editing myself. They'll progressively get a bit better each one, I think, just because I started not really knowing much about the program, but just slowly worked it out. So they'll get better as they go.
Are you using Adobe After Effects or something?
After Effects. So I was a complete newbie to it when I first sort of sat down and tried to edit a video up. But I don't know, developed, just watched a few videos and then just got, you know what I mean, a little style together.
Cool.
And I think they'll slowly get a bit better. There'll be more animations and slicker kind of like things happening and etc. I'll find other ways to do stuff.
Cool. So, I'm digging it. I like it. Well,
cool. Thank you. Anyway, yeah, thanks for having me on your show and whatnot. And yeah, it's been good to chat these 2 times.
Well, keep doing what you're doing, man. I like it.
Thank you. Yeah.
And
cool.
Where can people find you? How can people find your music and follow you on social media and stuff?
So on Twitter, I'm Francis Aaron UK. That's my Twitter. Most of like YouTube is the same. So if you just type in Francis Aaron, AARON, you'll find me in that way. I will have a website up, but this is another project that I'm trying to finish off, get a website up for January, which will serve as a blog, as sort of a port of call, really, where all my writings, etc., which I've got a lot that I need to post, which I don't really put on Twitter at the moment because I wanted them to go on blogs. I'll have a website up pretty soon, hopefully before the next song gets released. I'll put a lot of lyric breakdowns and stuff like that.
Very cool. Well, I'll be sure to put links to everything in the show notes and on the podcast
definitely.
website. Francis, thanks again for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Yeah,
really enjoyed it.
Chat to you.
Yeah, it was
likewise.
It was a great, deep conversation, and I hope we get to do it again in the future, man.
Yeah. Some point in the near future, we'll have to meet up and chat about whatever else has been going on.
Maybe we can do it in person sometime, man. That'd be great. That's still my favorite way to do it.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Yeah, I'll definitely be up for that.
Cool.
But yeah, cool. Right.
Oh, thanks
again.
Have a
great Christmas and New Year. And, I'll chat to you on Twitter at some point.
Yes, sir. Thanks everybody for listening. Goodbye. All right.
Right. Yeah.
All right. It was another good one, eh? Go to diederik.blog to find all the show notes there, and you can also find a link to all our sponsors on that page. That's diederik.blog. That's spelled DIEDERIK.blog. You can find everything there. And also check out Francis Aaron. You spell his name FrancisAaron. If you look for him on YouTube, you will find his videos. Check out his stuff. It's awesome. I'm a big fan. That's why I invited him on the show in the first place. I heard his song and I was like, oh, we gotta listen to this guy. It's good. He's good. And this conversation proved that he knows a lot of stuff and there's a lot of depth behind those songs. So check out his music. It's great. And thanks for listening, everybody. I'll see you in the next one. Tot ziens.